Okay, welcome to this Zoom talk about the future of artificial intelligence. Greetings from Switzerland, wonderful Switzerland. And yes, okay, this talk is about artificial intelligence and the application of the fractal brain theory towards the creation of artificial intelligence. Now, this talk is very ambitious because it's about how to create true artificial intelligence. So it's a very ambitious talk. And I hope at the end of this presentation, you won't be disappointed. It sounds like a joke. We're going to show you how to create true artificial intelligence. So in a sense, it's just as ambitious or more ambitious than last two Zoom talks, which was about system change or how to change the world and save the planet. And the one after that was how to unify world religion and unify religion with science. But this, in a sense, is actually more ambitious because it's something that's really in the media spotlight right now. And it's this idea of, this goal of creating true artificial intelligence. Okay, so now the talk begins. So here we are. We're going to explain how to create true artificial intelligence. Now, just a bit of background. Okay, so just a bit of we're just going to go through the current context of what's happening in the world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we're just going to kind of like zip through in a kind of like skimming stone way. So we're not trying to be give an exhaustive kind of summary, because I think there's loads of other talks out there that do this. But for the first 5-10 minutes, we just give a skimming stone kind of overview of the current state of artificial intelligence. Okay. So we're going to do a screen share. Okay, so is that screen being shared? Okay, that screen is being shared. Okay, so great. Oh, sorry, did you see that screen? Did you see the screen there? Okay, sorry, okay, fantastic. Okay, I'll edit that out of the YouTube. Okay, screen share again. Okay, great. So basically, the situation now with artificial intelligence, I mean, it's like the holy grail of present times. Artificial intelligence, the holy grail of present times. Stephen Hawking, the great Stephen Hawking, has said success in creating artificial intelligence will be the biggest event in human history. Now, Vladimir Putin, love him, hate him, he knows a thing or two about politics. He has said whoever becomes the leader in AI will become the ruler of the world. Now, China has said it's going to become the leader in AI by 2030, and the kind of present rule of the world, maybe the country that thinks it's the rule of the world, the United States, doesn't really like this. So there's this tech trade war going on. It's really about technology and artificial intelligence, really. As I said, the apex of this kind of like conflict. Mark Cuban, who's an investor and a kind of entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur from the kind of .com one days, the world's first trillionaires are going to come from somebody who masters AI. And Bill Gates, if you invent a breakthrough in AI so machines can learn, then that is worth 10 Microsofts. Okay, so it's become a very, very big deal, this kind of goal to create artificial intelligence. But there's a problem. Okay, all eyes on this amazing prize. There's a problem that there's not much artificial intelligence, or there's not much artificial stuff that's very intelligent, let's say. And also, the kind of what's touted as breakthroughs in recent years are really the rehashing of old technology from 40, 50 years ago. And the kind of breakthroughs or seeming breakthroughs have really come about through just using extra processing power and loads of kind of extra training data from the internet. And there's something not quite right with existing AI. It doesn't seem to quite work. So, one of the kind of like the poster childs of this current wave of AI technology, self-driving cars. Yes, they sort of drive themselves, but they do really silly things like crash into massive articulated lorries at full speed and crash into parked fire engines. And the first fatality was actually an Uber car, Volvo, crashing into a lady crossing the street. The crazy thing is, if the kind of the Volvo built-in safety features were left switched on, the lady would have been saved, but yet the so-called artificial intelligence ran over her. And we could go on. I mean, this is pretty grotesque. There's something about self-driving cars and parked police cars. Okay, so they crash into parked police cars, and they crash into kind of parked emergency vehicles. So the common factor is basically the AI doesn't quite understand things that are outside its training set. So things that don't happen a lot, like parked police cars that park very badly, admittedly. they tend to crash into them. Now, when I'm driving about, I don't know about you, but when I'm driving about and I see a parked police car, I tend to drive more carefully. You know, I tend to really, I tend to even if it's parked, I see a parked police car or a police car behind me, in front of me, I drive super careful. I don't crash straight into it. You know what I'm saying? So there's something about the way these self-driving cars work, which is not very intelligent. Okay, and the main algorithm behind these so-called breakthroughs is an algorithm called backpropagation. And this algorithm has been around for about 40, 50 years. Okay, so all these kind of self-driving car technologies, AlphaGo, all these kind of seeming breakthroughs use backpropagation. Now we could give a 2-hour talk about the problems of backpropagation, but we'll just give a few examples. Okay, there's one called adversarial examples, or adversarial attacks that neural networks can easily be fooled and hacked. I'll give you just one example. I won't go over this list. I mean, you give a 2-hour talk about the limitations of backpropagation. Now, okay, here, look, this is an example of an adversarial attack or adversarial example. Now you see here, you see a picture of a panda, don't you? Okay, and the neural network says, yes, I see a panda. Now you can create a kind of like
Why you're not sharing the screen?
Oh, I'm not sharing the screen. Oh, hang on, let me share the screen. Oh, yes. I de-shared the screen. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I de-shared the damn screen. Okay, here we go. Look. So backpropagation is this technology which really is kind of behind all these so-called breakthroughs. But there's one example called adversarial attacks, where basically it is really like shows a fundamental flaw to how the technology doesn't work basically. So okay, you see this example here. Okay, basically here's the panda. A picture of a panda. The neural network, the backpropagation neural network recognizes it's a panda. So okay, that's very good. But what you can do, you can create a mask. You can basically, this is a mask where you can alter every single pixel in the original picture by a fraction of a percent. And this mask is made from this picture of a gibbon. So by altering every pixel in this picture by a fraction of a percent, you can create this picture. Now you're thinking this picture looks exactly like the first picture, but now the neural network thinks it's a gibbon. So crazy stuff. I mean, this is really, you can actually fool a neural network to think that a stop sign on the road is a go sign. So adversarial attacks or hacks are actually something, an Achilles heel of this kind of technology. Okay, so it's enough to say, we don't have to go through an exhaustive kind of analysis of backpropagation. It's enough to say that the godfather of backpropagation, okay, Geoffrey Hinton, who's really the kind of leading light of this technology, even he has said within the past 2 years, he said, my view is to throw it all away and start again. Okay, quote unquote. Quote, I think the way we're doing computer vision is just wrong. It works better than anything else at present, but that doesn't mean it's right. Okay, so if the leading light, the godfather of kind of backpropagation is saying this, then it kind of like tells you that there's something not quite right with backpropagation. There's another kind of like real problem with backpropagation and these kind of so-called breakthroughs that have happened in recent years. Okay, you see on this graph here, okay, you look along this curve, and basically that's the kind of previous generation of kind of old AI, pre the current wave, which began about 2012. And you see here, the usage of energy really increases. The amount of computation needed to make these so-called breakthroughs really increase. Now, before, the graph kind of went up with Moore's law, kind of doubled every 2 years. But with the current crop of backpropagation kind of driven neural nets, the doubling is happening every 3.5 months, so that per year, the amount of resource required is actually 10 times every year. Or, computer resources, they get increasingly diminishing returns on your kind of like performance. It's sufficient to say that GP3T, the latest breakthrough in kind of so-called artificial intelligence, at the latest NeurIPS conference, which is the big meetup of this whole technology and this whole field, artificial intelligence, machine learning using neural nets and backpropagation, the team OpenAI that made GP3T have admitted in a paper that basically the gains that have been made from scaling are over. I mean, GPT-3 uses about $37 million worth of electricity and compute power to train it. Okay, so if you extrapolate this curve, it means that within a year, okay, GPT-4, if it comes out, it's going to take about a third of $1 billion worth of training just to train the model. So it's not feasible. So something has basically hit a wall now, okay, to do with energy usage. Okay, so basically, instead of dwelling on the kind of what's wrong with existing AI, I mean, what we're going to do is basically, okay, spend the rest of the talk explaining how do we overcome the limitations of existing AI and how do we actually go to the goal of creating true artificial intelligence. Okay, so we're going to kind of move on to the kind of proper part of the talk now. We're actually going to explain how to do it. Okay. Now, back to screen share. Okay, I better kind of like just screen share again. That's lucky. Okay, screen share again. So the next step and the way forward. Okay, what many of the people working in the field are saying anyway is that okay, so some new approach or idea is needed now. Okay, so it's no good just to keep flogging the dead horse and trying to pour money and resources and compute power into backpropagation or the existing technologies. Some new idea is needed. Increasingly, many voices have been saying that we should look to biology for inspiration. Okay, so it's kind of obvious. We have this brain and that does do intelligence, the human brain. Surely that should help us kind of somehow create true artificial intelligence. Thirdly, some of the leading lights have been talking about this thing called generative artificial intelligence, point 3. Okay, so for instance, in this diagram, okay, the next step in artificial intelligence, machine learning, according to some of the leading lights. In 2013, Geoffrey Hinton said, generative models, that's what I really believe in. Ultimately, I'm completely convinced that generative models would be better. Jan LeCun, another leading light of backpropagation, so-called deep convolutional neural networks, he said, a learning predictive model is what we're missing today, and in my opinion, is the biggest obstacle to significant progress in AI. Based in London, Demis Hassabis, DeepMind, the hardest challenge for AI research to build an agent that can plan hierarchically is truly creative and can generate solutions. And also Judah Pearl, who's a kind of very influential theorist, we must invoke causal models. Associations are not enough. Okay, stop share. Now, okay, generative models, predictive models, causality. Okay, these leading lights think that the next step involve somehow these factors. Now, there is no kind of mutual exclusivity between these three ideas, generative, predictive, causal. They're actually related to one another. Now, if I generate a pattern forwards in time, then I'm making a prediction, aren't I? Or attempting a prediction. So if I generate patterns, okay, and I project them forwards in time, then I'm making a prediction. Now, if these predictions or generated patterns forwards in time match up with physical reality, then there's a chance I'm extracting the causal relationships in physical reality. So causal, generative, predictive, they're actually intertwined concepts. And we think it really is the key to this new generation of artificial intelligence. And we think that this is exactly how the brain works. Okay. So, okay, the other points which we, okay, so a screen share again. Okay, the point which we didn't, the fourth point, okay, the real impediment to, working out how to create true artificial intelligence, we don't actually have a scientific understanding of what is intelligence, and we don't even have a working definition of what is intelligence. Okay, so that sounds like, it sounds funny that, we're trying to create something called intelligence, artificial intelligence, but we can't actually define what it is we're trying to create. So I think at the outset, we need to really go head on and just tackle this question of what is intelligence at the outset in order to create artificial intelligence. So, okay, so we'll move to the next step. Okay, so really, the next part of the talk, we're going to basically go right into the question of what is the nature of intelligence. Okay, and overall, there's a kind of fork in the road. There's two ways of looking at what is the nature of intelligence overall. And this is a really important question to ask, because if you take the wrong fork in the road, then you're never going to create true artificial intelligence. You're always going to be kind of wondering, why we haven't created true artificial intelligence yet. And the two forks in the road are this. Okay, screen share again. This talk uses quite a few diagrams. Okay, so basically there's two camps. Okay, there's two major camps. So here we have okay, two camps. So this is a very important question of what is the nature of intelligence. Okay, so basically, if you get this question right, then everything is much, much easier. Get it wrong, then basically you're completely in the dark. Now, the two forks in the road are, okay, two camps versus one another. Okay, so I need to explain what it is. Okay, the camp on the right think there's no real kind of unified explanation of what is intelligence. They believe that there's nothing special about intelligence. Now, by going through the individual names, we get a better idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so basically, the camp on the right, I think they're mistaken. They think that basically there's nothing special about intelligence. So Gary Marcus thinks intelligence is just a kludge. It's just a kind of random bunch of ad hoc solutions cobbled together by evolution. There's many varieties of kludge that you can create. So there's nothing special about intelligence. Roman Yampowski and Eliezer Yudkowsky, they believe in this thing called mind design space. So the human mind is a tiny point in a space of possible minds. And there's many kinds of minds, and they're all like, can be considered intelligence. There's nothing special about human intelligence, and it's just a kind of like a one kind of many kinds of intelligence. And Niels Nielsen, who was very influential back in the 90s, and he died recently, he wrote a book, his last book, which came out about 10 years ago. He said basically that he, quote, doubts an overarching theory of artificial intelligence will ever emerge. Marvin Minsky has said, basically, it was a mistake to look for common principles behind intelligence. He said, basically, categorically, there are no common principles behind intelligence. Stephen Wolfram has said, certified genius Stephen Wolfram has said, basically, as a young man, he believed that there would be a breakthrough that would give us artificial intelligence. No, he doesn't believe that anymore. Dan Hillis has said, created parallel computers, thinking machines. He was very big in the 90s and the early noughties. He said, basically, intelligence is not a unitary thing. Ben Goetzel has said repeatedly in his interviews and lectures, basically, there's no one critical algorithm to intelligence. Geoffrey Hinton has said, basically, yes, everyone would love to have a single solution for everything. But he says, okay, in practical terms, we can never get a unified solution, that we only get parts of the puzzle. So you see, this camp is saying, basically, there's no real answer waiting to be found. Intelligence is just one kind of many kinds of intelligence, you see. So, so really, what they're saying is basically, Mother Nature has cobbled together this thing called human intelligence, but there's many ways of doing it. And it's basically like a kludge. And it's just one kind of many kinds of intelligence that you can create, and all kind of roughly equivalent, or, there's nothing special about human intelligence. Okay. Now, the camp which I think is right. Okay, we move to the left-hand side. Okay, the camp which is right. Okay, Steve Grand, UK's very own Steve Grand, OBE, Sir Steve Grand has said, basically, there is a one-sentence solution to the creation of artificial intelligence, or one sentence or one formula solution. He has said, without that one-sentence solution or that one formula for artificial intelligence, you can never create artificial intelligence. Now, it doesn't know what that one sentence is, but he's speculating. Okay, Jürgen Schmidhuber, okay, Switzerland's finest. Okay, I'm here in Switzerland. So Jürgen Schmidhuber is, he has said basically that 10 lines of pseudocode will give us true recursively self-modifying artificial intelligence. He says we have 5 of those lines of pseudocode already. With the other 5 lines, then we'll create all dancing, all singing artificial intelligence. That's what he thinks. Now, okay, Andrew Ng and Jeff Hawkins and Ray Kurzweil believe at least that there's a unified cortical algorithm, which is most of the brain, about 85, 90% of the brain. Fei-Fei Li, who is, when I've shown this diagram over the years, I've had so much flack for people saying, you haven't got a woman in your diagram. So I finally got a woman in the diagram. Okay, so in January, she has said, okay, she was the ex-director of the Stanford AI lab. Now she runs a lab affiliated with Stanford called the Human-Centered AI Lab. Okay, so she has said that there will be a basic set of principles behind intelligence. Okay, so that's what she said, and I think she's right. Jan LeCun has said, basically, has speculated that there is a single learning rule, biological principle, or procedure behind the workings of biological brains. Eric Horvitz of Microsoft has said that there is a deep theory of artificial intelligence waiting to be found. Now, David Deutsch has said, okay, he has said in an article he wrote about 10 years ago, he said basically it's plausible that just a single idea stands between us and the breakthrough that's going to give us artificial intelligence. Okay, and then he goes on to say that it's going to have to be one of the best ideas ever. Okay, I'm going to tell you what the idea is in a minute. Okay, so that's David Deutsch. It says you get an idea of basically, what the two camps are. So look, if there really is an answer waiting to be found, if we go the right-hand fork, then we'll never find an answer. We'll be spending generations and hundreds of years creating kluges and creating these kind of concoctions and wondering why we haven't created true AI yet. I think the answer lies in the left-hand fork, and this is the road we're going to take. Okay, so if there is a critical algorithm, okay, go back to not screen sharing. Okay, look, if there is a critical algorithm, then we ask, okay, what does this critical algorithm do? Okay, there's one critical algorithm, then what does it do? The answer is the one critical algorithm generates all the other algorithms. Okay, if we can find a single algorithm that can generate all the other algorithms, then that's the critical algorithm. Now how would this critical algorithm generate all the other algorithms? We think the answer is to do with basically it involves the most creative, prolific, generative algorithm we know of on the planet, arguably in the universe. That algorithm is evolution. Now, this is where the kind of approach I'm promoting or talking about converges with an established set of ideas. And it's a compelling idea, and it keeps recurring. It's the idea that evolution is happening in our minds and happening in biological brains. And I think it's absolutely correct. So it's the idea of Gerald Edelman, Nobel Prize winner, his idea of neural Darwinism. It's the idea of Richard Dawkins, MEMS, somehow, ideas are as genes and kind of like evolve like in biological evolution. It's the idea of genetic algorithms. It's the idea of eco-rhythms. Okay, Leslie Valiant, who is a Harvard computer scientist, has said that there must be a unified theory because our behavior comes from genetically evolved kind of DNA programmed aspects together what we learn in the course of our lives. He said there must be a unified theory of learning and evolution. I think he's absolutely right. Okay, so I think this existing idea is the right path, but I'm going to argue it's not just a matter of metaphor or analogy. I would argue it goes much, much further. It is basically one of symmetry, that fundamentally, the fundamental process of evolution is not just merely metaphorically or analogously happening in the human mind. It is fully and completely and totally happening in the human mind. It's actually the same thing. Okay, that's what I'm going to argue and try to, I hope make a compelling and hopefully convincing case by the end of tonight's talk. Okay, so if we go back to screen share, okay, so if we, okay, so let's go to the next diagram here. Okay, so basically the kluge camp, okay, the kluge camp involves three interrelated fallacies, okay, and they really impede the progress of AI. We talked about this already, but they're kind of interlocking, okay, no critical algorithm is needed for creating AI. But if we can show that, by showing that evolution is happening in the human brain, that this critical generative algorithm is generating all the other algorithms, we absolutely disprove the kluge camp. We argue really kind of finally for the path to the left, this idea that there is a critical solution waiting to be found. Okay, if there is this critical generative algorithm, they're basically the ideas of Marvin Minsky, his idea that there's no common principles are disproved because he has said, there's no general principles behind how people think, but his ideas of a society of mind, okay, these denizens of his society of mind, they have come about through a certain process, and that process is evolution. So if you can show that evolution is indeed creating those denizens of his society of mind, then it is a common principle behind how brains work. If you can show that that process is happening within the course of the organism's lifetime, you doubly disprove his position. Ben Goetzel, who has said basically the reason why there's no critical algorithm is because we can't find a generative process that can create all the ad hoc human generated solutions. Therefore, he thinks that the route to true AI is to cobble together ad hoc human-generated solutions. Okay, so by demonstrating a critical algorithm that can generate all these human solutions, then basically, again, you kind of disprove his position. Now, as for the what we talked about earlier, this idea of all intelligence exists as points in mind design space. Now, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is one of the champions of this idea of mind design space, now he has said that basically, yes, okay, I need to wave my hands around to explain this. He has said basically that intelligence is a point in mind design space. So human intelligence is a tiny point in this space of minds. He then goes on to say that basically the space of possible minds is itself a subset of the superset of optimization processes. And then he goes on to say that one of those optimization processes is evolution. Well, if you show that evolution is happening in a tiny subset of the subset, then you kind of make ridiculous the notion of mind design space. You basically show that evolution, when you show that evolution is happening in the human mind, you basically show that intelligence is not a point in mind design space. Intelligence is that which searches mind design space. You see the distinction. Intelligence is that which can reconfigure itself into all the space of possible minds. There's something flexible, creative, and adaptable about intelligence. Without that, you don't really have intelligence. Now, the other part of the diagram, okay, so the last part, neuroscience only has a minor role to play in the creation of AI. Now, the fallacy here is often expressed like this. We don't have to create artificial intelligence like the human brain or biological brains in the same way we don't have to create submarines that swim like fish or birds that fly like, create planes that fly like birds, you see. But if we show that evolution is happening in the brain, then we show basically that that idea has completely missed the point. It's not about creating birds versus planes versus submarines versus fish. The goal of creating true AI was always about finding that meta-generative process that creates birds, planes, submarines, and fish. So you see this distinction, you see. So by showing, which we will in the course of this talk, that evolution is fully happening in the brain, you completely disprove the core fallacies of the kluge camp. Okay. So, okay, now we have a problem. We have a problem now. I have to explain that there's a kind of a gap in human understanding, which we need to overcome. The problem is this. Okay, the problem is that there's something missing in the theory of evolution. Okay, there's something missing in the theory of evolution, and I promise I don't mean God. Okay, I promise I don't mean. I know. I know the last two talks mentioned the word God a lot, so I promise I don't mean God. I mean that basically in mainstream academic scientific research in evolution, there's a missing factor. It's been said that modern evolutionary thinking, the neo-Darwinist synthesis, is lacking a theory of the generative. It's been called the forgotten cause in modern evolutionary thinking. Historically, it's been called the puzzle of the arrival of the fittest. So you have the survival of the fittest, but this is the arrival of the fittest. A book came out a few years ago called Arrival of the Fittest, which claimed to solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, it makes it more tractable. It solves the problem makes it more tractable for what's called micromolecular machines. But how do complex biological forms come into being? That's the puzzle. And there's a massive gap in the theory of evolution. So that's something we need to solve if we're going to actually create this generative algorithm that can create all the other algorithms. Okay, so in order to create true artificial intelligence, what I'm saying is we also have to fit in one of the last pieces of the jigsaw of this important theory called evolution. I told you this is a very ambitious talk. Okay, so to the next stage, how do we find this generative solution? How do we find and how do we fill in this last piece of the jigsaw puzzle in the theory of evolution? Okay, I'll show you how. Okay. Okay, so we're back to David Deutsch again. He said the critical idea, concept, and language needed to create true AI and fill in this missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle in the theory of evolution. I'll quote him again. It is plausible that just a single idea stands between us and the breakthrough that will produce true AI, but it will have to be one of the best ideas ever. Okay, so Rodney Brooks, who was a longtime director of the prestigious MIT AI lab, he said in the late 90s, he said basically he speculated a design principle, concept, or language that may revitalize the mind sciences in the 21st century. Melanie Mitchell, who is a professor of complexity studies at the Santa Fe Institute, she writes very good books, by the way. The dream of neuroscience is to come up with the high-level programming language of the brain that allows us to make sense of what the system is doing in terms that we can understand. So I think this provides the key, and I'll tell you what this David Deutsch most amazing idea the breakthrough that's going to give us true AI. That's also one of the best ideas ever. And I can tell you, we already know it's one of the best ideas ever because it's really the key idea behind science. And I'll tell you what the idea is. That idea is symmetry. Okay, symmetry. You've heard the word, you probably recall from school, this idea of symmetry, but how does that relate to solving how the brain works and creating true AI? Okay, back to okay. So basically, science is like trying to understand the patterns of nature, isn't it? It's about basically understanding nature and the physical world, seeing the recurring patterns. But it's more than that, because it's also finding the patterns behind the patterns. It's about finding the meta patterns that unify all the separate patterns in these kind of unified and universal scientific theories. And the word that describes this process of finding unifying patterns, meta patterns, kind of patterns that show all the separate patterns are the same pattern, that process is symmetry. So, okay, back to diagrams again. Okay, so this is what you were taught in school. Okay, basic symmetry you were taught in school. Now you see this shape here. Okay, it's a square. No, there's rotational symmetry. I can rotate the square 90 degrees, 180 degrees. This is basic high school stuff, and it's like the same shape. It appears as the same. It's like you've not changed it. Okay, and also to the right, if you take this shape, the same square, if I reflect it in the mirror along these axes, kind of reflective symmetry, then it appears as the same shape. Okay, that's high school kind of ideas of symmetry. By the way, this idea of symmetry emerged during the Renaissance. Okay, so but the idea of symmetry becomes expanded. So basically, the idea is expanded to include the idea of transformations in general. So the idea of symmetry, really, in its most general terms, is this idea of transformation and invariance. Okay. Change and immunity to change. So something is transformed, but something stays invariant. Something is changed, but something stays immune to change. Like the high school symmetry stuff, we did those transformations to the square, but it seemed there's an aspect, the overall kind of form that we were transforming seemed to appear as the same. Okay. Now the idea is basically a transformation with an aspect staying invariant. So we look at the diagram. In the top row, we have, okay, different shapes. The square is being transformed into a hexagon, then it's being transformed into a circle, then a star. But there's an aspect that stays invariant, that's the color. Okay, there's an underlying kind of like a kind of invariant aspect, and that's the color. Here, basically, we have a square, but now the color changes, but the invariant aspect is the square. Okay, so that's in the most broadest possible terms is a kind of a way of understanding what symmetry is. Transformation and invariance, change and immunity to change. In the next diagram, okay, this is another idea of symmetry. We have this original like brain-like shape. So grab some coffee. Okay, so the original shape here, we can like move it to the right, we can translate it. Okay, that's obviously the same shape. We can also translate it and rotate it. We can translate it and reflect it. We can translate it and make it smaller and then scale and rotate. Now, the thing is, even though these look like different shapes, basically there's a symmetry between the original shape and these shapes. What has stayed invariant is basically the relative angles between the lines and the relative proportions of the lines. You see, even though the lines have grown and been rotated, the relative angles between the lines and the proportions between lines, that's the invariant aspect. These are called affine transformations. So that's basically another example of symmetry. So okay, there's another idea which is very important, and it's called self-symmetry or self-similarity, is the idea of fractals. Now, the thing I had before, which is basically the brain shape, what I've done is basically I've made smaller copies of that brain shape and I put it inside itself. Okay, then I've recursively done the same thing. I've taken the smaller copy, and I've made even smaller copies, and I put it inside itself. So that's recursively nesting the same shape within itself, and that's called self-symmetry or self-similarity. I can do it to infinity. And this gives rise to the property of fractals or self-similarity. So here's another few examples. That's a natural fractal of Romanesque broccoli or cauliflower. So that's basically, see, the overall shape is reflected in the tiny parts of the shape. And this is like a fractalized kind of dodecahedron. The tiny dodecahedrons reflect the entire dodecahedron. Now, the most common fractal there is, the most kind of that we see in nature, we see everywhere, is basically the tree. Okay, so to see a tree, like the branches of a tree reflect the entire tree. So even the veins on the leaf of a tree are like a tiny little tree. So the most common type of fractal is a tree. And we're going to be using a lot of this thing called a binary tree. So a binary tree is basically where the branches is always binary. You see, that's a binary tree. It's always branching in two ways. Now, in terms of invariant aspect for understanding the brain and mind, we think that the invariant aspect involves binary trees. We think binary trees is absolutely ubiquitous in understanding the brain and the mind, and also ontogenesis, i.e. aspects of biological development. So we think binary trees are really important. Okay, so we're going to just go on about binary trees for a bit. Okay, here you can see that we can use binary trees to represent space. So that's a simple branch. You see, that's a binary branch. That's another binary branch. I just rotated it. Now you see what I've done here is I've kind of like sub-branched or kind of like joined two branches together to make another binary tree. Can you see? And now I can repeat this process recursively to make this kind of grid shape. Can you see? It's like it's a binary tree, but it's representing a 2D grid. So you've used binary trees to represent 2D space. So trees have become space. Okay. Can I move on? Okay, now you can also use binary trees to represent time. Okay, so that's a binary tree. And you see the grids we had before have become like branches of this temporal tree. So there's kind of eight time sequences, T1 to T8, and these are like successions of time over this binary tree. Now, what I have here is what's called an unbalanced binary tree, but you can see that they're equivalent. They're representing 8 time stages, but it's doing it a slightly different way. Basically, here's a binary branch, here's a binary branch, here's a binary branch, but it's unbalanced, but still representing the same thing. Okay, so binary trees can represent space and time. Okay, that's an important idea. Okay, so here is okay, more binary trees, and then this is basically what I call a TH grid. It's basically the same binary tree, but drawn in flattened form. Can you see exactly the same, topologically exactly the same as the above, but it's drawn in a flattened way. Okay, now we think that this binary tree language, is basically ubiquitous in understanding the brain and ontogenesis. So we think it's really important. And we think this language is also, we think this language is, we think it is really powerful, and it's also really it's literally flexible. Okay, I'll show you a bit of code on my smartphone. Oh, by the way, I mean, the way of representing 2D space I showed you earlier of segmenting 2D space is exactly how the two latest and greatest video compression technologies, H.265 and H.266, that's how they demarcate kind of 2D frames of video. And also what's called wavelet compression also uses this kind of binary kind of like divisioning scheme. And also is also of interest that Lisp, okay, Lisp is a kind of artificial intelligence programming language. And basically Lisp represents lists in exactly this kind of binary conjugating way. Okay, so that's a kind of theoretically very satisfying thing about this binary tree way of looking at things. Okay, so you see my smartphone. Okay, basically that is, I'll just cover up the okay, you can see that, can't you? Basically that's my smartphone, and that's the grid you saw earlier. Okay, the grid you saw is basically on the smartphone. So the screen share grid. Okay, I'll share it again. Basically that. Okay, what you're seeing there is on my smartphone. So stop share. So the grid you see there is on my smartphone. It's just drawn in a kind of dynamic way. I've got to just cover up the camera again. Now, if I just move it really close, you can see. Okay, so I can basically, that tree flexes around. I can I can slide the components. You can see it sliding about. So the binary trees, they're literally flexible. They flex around, and I can scale it. I can scale, recursively scale. Can you see so it's recursively scaling. Can you see the binary trees? There's literally, you can flex them, you can scale them, and you can rotate them. You rotate the trees. I mean that is basically just to show that what we're talking about is really, it's a flexible language. So literally, even though it seems like really kind of like clunky binary trees, the basic transformations you saw earlier, the affine transformations, slide, scale, rotate, shear, are an inherent part of this binary tree language. And we think this binary tree language is completely perfect for representing and encoding the brain and all aspects of thought and also biological development. Okay, so we'll explain that in a minute, but we're just going to talk about kind of mathematical languages. So earlier on, we talked about the need for this kind of language to basically solve intelligence. So the next diagram, okay, the next diagram, we're going to basically explain the idea of languages for science. Okay, obviously it involves mathematics. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick history lesson. Okay, now this idea of what is science and what is the mathematics of science historically? Okay, it is this. Okay, so science is like joining the dots. So in the kind of Renaissance period, European Renaissance, Tycho Brahe had lots of dots. He had lots of kind of observational data, kind of motions of the planets. Okay, and there's Johann Kepler's job to join the dots. And his big innovation to join all the observational dots, his innovation was elliptical orbits. Can you see elliptical orbits? That's his big innovation, because people thought orbits had to be perfectly circular. But he said, no, elliptical orbits. And then all the data fitted the joining of the dots. Okay. Then later on, René Descartes, the great René Descartes, who's been called the father of modern philosophy, the father of Western philosophy, he came up with this thing called analytic geometry, whereby you could express through mathematical equations the joinings of the dots. You could express mathematically elliptical orbits. Okay, so that's an innovation, isn't it? Then later on came the great Isaac Newton and the great Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz. Okay, they came up with differential calculus. Now you can work out how the dots change in time. You see, so that's very profound, isn't it? So now you've basically got a dynamic aspect to describing the motions of the planets now. In a nutshell, that basically describes the format of science as it's mainly been done since the time of Isaac Newton. Of course, the differential equations have become much more complex. The joining of the dots is much more complex. There's many, many more dots now to join in all the different sciences. But it's the same basic idea, using mathematical equations to essentially join dots together. We can substitute idea of corralling the dots instead of joining dots for statistical science, basically, but still using these kind of like traditional mathematical formula and kind of continuous kind of differential equations in order to describe a kind of dynamic phenomena and these aspects of science. Now, there's a problem because this traditional way of doing science doesn't really do the kind of structures we're interested in life science, which are discrete. Okay, so this continuous mathematics, this differentiable mathematics does continuous things like the motions of the planets, but it doesn't really do recursively nested hierarchical structure. It doesn't really do binary trees. It doesn't really do the kind of things we're interested in, kind of discrete, discontinuous processes that have, they're kind of jump discontinuous, okay? So the traditional calculus doesn't really handle it at all. So what we need is basically another kind of mathematical language. Years ago in the Singularity Summit, someone said that an impediment to the progress of artificial intelligence is that we need a new mathematical language. I disagree. I see the problem is really that we're using the wrong kind of mathematics. There is an existing kind of mathematics called discrete mathematics, which is absolutely perfect for describing the brain, genomics, and all the the creation of artificial intelligence. Let me explain what this is. Now, okay, in this, oh, I'm not showing a diagram. I've got to share the diagram. So I've got to go back to this thing and then share the diagram. Okay, screen share this diagram here, which is, okay, so, this diagram shows the two men who created this book called Principia Mathematica. Now, Principia Mathematica really is one of the towering intellectual achievements of the 20th century. It's up there with general relativity and the foundation forming of quantum mechanics. Okay, so Principia Mathematica, what is it? The great Bertrand Russell, okay, you know, kind of one of the great kind of minds of the 20th century, won 2 Nobel Prizes, and Alfred North Whitehead. What he did is this. They did something really amazing. Okay, so Bertrand Russell, in their book Principia Mathematica, what they did was this. They basically reduced all mathematics to set theory, because that's what Principia Mathematica is about. So all mathematics, all the stuff that came before, they reduced it to this thing called set theory. You probably encountered set theory in school. It's basically discrete mathematics. We don't have to go into the details of discrete mathematics. It's enough for us to say that basically what discrete mathematics is things like set theory, it's Boolean algebra, it is logic. That's discrete mathematics, okay? Now, for our purposes, it's enough to explain that basically all the structures of discrete mathematics, Boolean algebra, the constructs of logic, Boolean algebra, essentially they are binary trees. All the relationships of logic, all the relationships of Boolean algebra, set theory, are binary, you see. Now, there is an even deeper level of discrete mathematics called formal axiomatic systems. And we think this is really the level where the action is really going on. So we'll talk about really the deepest level of mathematics. And we think this deepest level of mathematics is the perfect language for explaining the brain and creating true artificial intelligence. Now, I've gone at length to explain this because to explain that basically this deepest level of mathematics is not like a poor cousin of the traditional calculus, because it reduces all existing mathematics. Okay, so you can reduce all mathematics to discrete mathematics. It's not somehow any, it's so incredibly powerful. But the thing is, it's not something humans can use, because a kind of 10-page proof in traditional mathematics might take 100 pages. So it's something which is really hard for humans to use, but it's perfect for machines to understand, and it's perfect for describing the architecture of brains and genomes, you see. So we think the answer lies in this kind of binary tree language that also, so what we're talking about basically is this kind of spatial temporal binary tree language that allows us to encode space and time, like we saw earlier, representing time and space, merge with the power of discrete mathematics. All the kind of relationships of Boolean algebra, logic, and set theory, you can basically plug in to these binary structures, spatial temporal binary tree structures, because discrete mathematics is essentially evolves binary trees. You see, it's a perfect match. Okay, so we think that is the key to creating true AI. Now we're missing something which we'll cover in the next talk. Okay, we've covered basically a kind of a language that maps to the structures of the brain, which we're going to explain in a minute. But we'll explain the calculus which animates this language in the next talk, and it's clever because it's recursively self-modifying. There's a recursively self-modifying trick involving this language, this calculus, which is essential for understanding the nature of intelligence and life. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically, we'll talk 50 minutes, and basically what I'm going to do is open things up to questions for a little bit, just to, so if you want to unmute yourselves, ask any questions, do so now while I sip some coffee. If you've got any questions, unmute yourselves. I think you can unmute yourselves and ask a question. If not, we'll just plow on.
All right, I've got a question.
Okay, great.
So you're a programmer, right? Or
so who is that?
This is Matt. This is Matt.
Oh, Matt. Okay, great. Yeah, Matt. Okay.
All right. So you're a programmer, right?
Yeah.
Like, what have you found any success that points towards that these ideas like are basically the correct path to finding true AI?
Well, basically, the brain theory, basically, I've been working on it for about 30 years now. And I think the past 6 years have really been spent translating these kind of new developments into computer code. So yes, I mean, it's a work in progress, but basically, there's the inspiration part to say that the brain is fractal, that there are recursively nested symmetries that allow us to explain the brain and cognition and genomes and stuff. But the real perspiration part, which has been the past 5-6 years, has been translating that into data structures and kind of neat code that works. And I got to tell you, like really, computer programming is really hard work. I realized, I mean, when I was a teenager back in the 80s, I mean, programming was easy. You had BASIC and you powered on the computer and it basically started programming. Now you have to learn a whole load of stuff. So I've taken advantage of the coronavirus situation. and the stopping in public talks really to get down to computer programming. And there's so much to learn, in terms of OpenGL, there's all these different languages, and then there's Java, Android Studio, then there's, IntelliJ. So there's been lots of learning going on, but it's a work in progress. And I think what I talk about in these talks, they are becoming computer codes. So they're becoming computer formalism, and basically, the ideas are coming alive as I progress in my coding of the theory. Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah. Yes. And so what you found so far, has that shown that this is kind of like the correct path, or to go on? Like,
well, I think basically in the next talk, what I'm explaining, when the ideas of this talk are absorbed, what I can show basically is that these ideas basically subsume all the kind of aspects, the best aspects of existing technologies. So at the very least, it basically kind of like subsumes or has the facets of all the technologies today which work really well, not just in artificial intelligence and machine learning, but also in data compression. I mean, we mentioned H.265 and H.266, and we can go to wavelets and other forms of data compression, video compression, and also even how search engines work and relational databases. It's not merely a unifying of kind of existing AI machine learning technologies, is also unifying of other fundamental computer technologies like data compression. So I think from these investigations into biology, I've arrived at a way of looking at existing algorithms in a way that kind of unifies them in a kind of very kind of like powerful ways. So if all these existing technologies do interesting things, there's a synergy if you can combine them into a single algorithm. This is what the kind of work involves. And this is what we'll be explaining in more in depth in the next talk. Okay. So any more questions? Okay, so Max.
Hi. So you mentioned the person who's going to figure out this artificial general intelligence will become trillionaire or something, but how will it pan out really? And what will be the potential applications of it that could pose a threat to humanity?
Yeah, I think basically the real threat is really not. I think Nick Bostrom, I don't really subscribe to his ideas much. I think the real threat is basically that we're living in a political system now. The world political situation is kind of drifting towards war. It's drifting towards something quite bad, with global warming, all these kind of ecological catastrophes, and all this kind of countries arming themselves up to the teeth. I think it's really the calamity is when these technologies can enter into a kind of existing political, social arena that's geared up for catastrophe anyway. So I think that's the real danger. In terms of super intelligent AI that recursively self-modifies itself to become the kind of evil AI genius that then turns the entire world into paper clips. I don't really see it personally. I see it as a very slim chance. I see it as basically, if we set things up in a way that's totally not having any control or oversight or supervision of this technology, then yeah, sure. If we light fires and not have any safeguards around it, then our house burns down. So I think we are more sensible than that. And also in the human brain, you got to realize that basically all this amazing computing technology in the human brain, frontal lobes, etc., it is a slave to the hypothalamus. It's a slave to the very primitive centers, you see. And I think you can create super intelligent AI, and then human beings with our hypothalamuses will be like the primitive parts of the super intelligence, which also has this control over the AI we create. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that by creating super intelligence that we will necessarily create kind of Terminator kind of some disaster scenario. And also in the human brain, there are all these kind of like safety mechanisms and override mechanisms that stop kind of aberrant or kind of like unwanted behaviors. I mean, like to do anything, basically move my arms and legs about. Basically there's 3 steps. There's blanket inhibition. There's like a lock, like a safety catch on a gun. There's a trigger. You have to remove the safety lock. And then you have to inhibit the inhibition. Then you have to inhibit another layer of inhibition. Then you have to activate all these things in sequence. Acetylcholine pathways have to give tonic facilitation. Then you have to, drive in dopamine to activate stratum and then to suppress other neurons. You see, there's always kind of safeguard mechanisms to stop our behavior becoming aberrant or just, ourselves thrashing around aimlessly. So I think we can learn from the brain these kind of like control mechanisms and apply them to the creation of AI. And eventually is a question of political control. We have, human politics is a matter of basically we need to control our creations, and as simple as that. But given the current political context, I think the real danger is that AI will be created and will be used for warfare, and I think that is the real danger to look out for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but also I would like the flip side of it. It's like, how could it be the potential to change everything for the better?
Well, I think just in terms of a simple utility, I think basically the creation of AI is going to be really transformative. I think in terms of smart cities, healthcare. Just imagine if anyone in the third world with a smartphone can have the best medical advice, the best legal advice. You know what I'm saying? That in itself is something, transformative, isn't it? And the idea of using AI, kind of benign AI in smart cities, regulating things, just the idea of true self-driving cars, that is a breakthrough in terms of, all this hunks of metal just parked, not doing anything. All the resources we save, every car becomes a taxi driver. But when that happens, you don't need so many cars. So there's these huge savings and huge, fundamental, simple benefits to society. But I think when you add it all together, if we could keep control of it, then it's going to be really, age of plenty. Really is going to be, like apocalypse for nerds, rapture for geeks. It's a complete phase shift in human evolution. No, really, I believe that. So yeah, any other questions? And if not, then we'll move on. Any other questions?
Yeah, why, if I can just mention something.
Okay, who's that?
Jazz.
Oh, Jazz. Okay, good to see you, man.
And you too. The diagram that you did do with the planets orbiting the sun and how in past people joined the dots to describe ellipses and then eventually create a formula to describe their motion. I did a presentation about 2 or 3 years ago, which looked at how currently the way AI is being produced to handle big data is kind of upside down. It's the equivalent of the Earth-centered model of the universe and moving from the Earth-centered model to the Sun-centered model. And that came about because 3 stages. First of all, people kept gather the data and they said, hey, look, we're not moving around in circles, we're moving around ellipses. And then eventually people created a formula, courtesy of people like Newton. And the single formula to do with gravity said, look, actually, this indicates that the sun is something we're orbiting. And it's formulas like that that allowed people to ultimately go to the moon. If we still relied on the Earth-centered model, we would never have gone to the moon, right? So the new model I was presenting a few months ago was as significant as a shift from the Earth-centered model to the Sun-centered model, which is this.
Completely.
I just want to say that what that model is, though, which is at the moment when people do AI, they rely on data being funneled through some kind of processor. It could be a CPU, it could be the brain, and that's where all the development is. How can we do better processing? But if you look at what happens in nature, you know this from biology. Historically, if we look at where the cells came from that ultimately resulted in the brain, they didn't have central processing units. They were just essentially bags of chemicals. They were just data. And they acquired elements which became genetic material later. And that means nature, it brought in processing elements and let go of them as was needed. So data was at the center, if you like, of information processing, and CPU stuff, genetic material, was on the outside. And what's happening more recently is this realization we're putting so much investment into making better CPUs and processors, but actually what should be happening is we need to look at data almost having its own kind of physics and allowing it to gravitate towards clusters of meaning rather than necessarily having to go through processes.
That's one of the issues of basically machine learning today, basically that, the relationship between CPUs and data. So basically that's a major issue now. So essentially now machine learning is these massive matrix multiplications. Basically, that's what deep learning is. I mean, matrix multiplication. And what they're saying is basically the real bottleneck is not in terms of processing power. The real bottleneck is in terms of the energy usage to get your data from RAM or static RAM or DRAM, SDDRAM into the CPU. And there's a bottleneck because basically the problem is not CPU power. The problem is getting the data to the CPU. So what the major issue is basically you move the CPUs into the memory. That's a major thing going on now.
Yeah, so GPUs, for example, that's what they do. So because of my background in molecular biology, one of the first things I thought of was, okay, what if every bit of data could have, in a nano-like way, have its own ability to acquire and let go of processing units, and it will behave more like a flock of birds, and then that murmuration that happens. The data would self-organize.
No, exactly. I mean that's a major thing going on in AI right now. It's basically how do you move the processing to merge with the data? No, completely. And we'll be talking a lot about molecular biology in a minute. So
okay, well, I'll let you carry on. I just wanted to see if it's great that you're doing that, because that's something that I'm interested in following.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I completely resonate. I mean, basically, it is a major issue right now, going on right now, basically, in terms of hardware design and basically, accommodating these algorithms. I think the real trick is to come up with an algorithm that really kind of breaks past the this kind of data bottleneck. So that's the real impediment now in terms of, kind of realizing the next generation of AI, and also shuttling data from kind of memory to the CPU is very expensive. It's actually, you take 500 times the energy to actually move the data to the CPU as you use to actually do a kind of floating point multiplication. So that's,
so if you could do the processing where this data is, you wouldn't need to move it.
Well, exactly, yes, and it's a major saving. If some estimates is 1,000 times the energy to move the data to the CPU. So that's a major thing right now. Okay, so what we're going to do is basically, we can talk more later, Jazz, but I think what we're going to do is carry on with the next stage of the talk. We're going to go into molecular biology now. Okay, so
perfect. I'll let you get on with that then.
Okay, so interesting, fascinating. Okay, so now we're going to kind of move on to the next stage. Okay, so we're still recording. We are going to screen share. Okay, the next part of the talk, what we're going to explain, okay, is we're going to go through oodles and oodles, loads of neuroscience data to really reinforce the point that this binary tree structure, this bifurcating doubling pattern, is absolutely ubiquitous. And I mean absolutely universal ubiquitous. And once you see it, you will never look at the brain or functional genomics or even molecular biology in the same way again, because this is universal symmetry invariant aspect. I'm going to explain what that is now. Okay, this universal invariant aspect. Okay, so back to me diagrams. Share a screen again. So next diagram is here. Okay, so look, the first of all, in cognitive science, okay, basically this idea of this universal binary tree doubling pattern behind how the brain works. Okay, there's this condition called Hemi neglect, where a kind of part of your right parietal lobe in the back of your head is destroyed, and basically you lose half your world. So Hemi neglect patients asked to draw a house can only draw half the house. It's baffling, isn't it? They've lost half their world. Sometimes you understand how things work when they go wrong. This is a case in point. Asked to draw a clock, they can only put the figures on one side of the clock. And flower, if they're asked to walk down the street where they live that they're familiar with, okay, asked to walk down, then basically they're asked to describe things on both sides of the street. They can only describe things on one side of the street in their memory, okay? Okay, if they're asked then to walk to the end of the street and turn around 180 degrees and walk the other way, now they can describe the things they couldn't describe at first in their memory. They've lost half their world, and reading a word on a menu, they can only read half the word. And eating a plate of food, they will basically, they'll start eating the plate of food, see my cursor, and they'll basically eat, and then they'll stop. And you think, why? And they've lost half their world. They can't see that part of the world. You rotate the plate of food around, then they start eating again, and then they stop. And then you rotate, you get it. They're kind of binary subdividing the world in this kind of like binary bifurcating way. in the next diagram, okay, this is relates to the Nobel Prize winning work from 2014. It's called grid cells. Okay, so as you walk around, that's my daughter from a few years ago, on a balance bike. As you walk around the ground, all mammals, rats, humans, mice, bats, they have grid cells basically. And it means as you go along allocentric space, which is like GPS space, as you go along the floor, neurons will light up in your brain when they hit the center of these hexagons. So it's amazing. It's like you've got a GPS system in your brain. So as you go along this grid, the neurons in your dentate gyrus will light up maximally when they're at the center of these hexagonal grid. Now, these hexagons come in certain sizes, and this is another diagram. Okay, these are equilateral triangles, which basically join the middle of hexagons, basically. So it's the same thing, it's the same diagram. And these hexagons, these hexagonal equilateral triangle grids, they come in certain sizes, and the scaling factor between the sizes is 1.42. Now, the significance of that number is 1.42 is roughly the square root of 2. So you multiply by that, again, you double. We divide it and you halve. Okay, so there's this doubling pattern going on with grid cells. And okay, now how your eyes represent vision, okay, is this. Basically, it's called spatial frequency. Now, in textbooks, you often learn about, kind of like bar detectors or line detectors that your eyes process images as such. But the better description is what's called spatial frequency gratings. Can you see the diagram here? What we have here is a normal frequency curve, like a sine wave, okay, going across the graph. And underneath, can you see these spatial frequency gratings? It's almost like the sine wave is creating a 2D kind of like troughs and crests. And basically, in this next diagram here, we see spatial frequency gratings or filters in different orientations. Now, the idea is basically that your brain, your visual cortex, represents all images. It breaks it down like this into spatial frequency gratings, like Fourier transforms, okay? Now the important thing, the experiments done quite a while ago, about 30 years ago, showed that basically, using a paradigm called just noticeable difference, they showed basically that humans basically can process a spatial frequency grating of a certain frequency, okay? And then of a certain frequency, and then I'll stop the screen share. And then basically, it's almost as if the visual cortex tires out, it gets tired. So the just noticeable difference increases. You have to increase the contrast to notice it. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is this kind of tiring of the detection ability of your visual cortex. Okay, if you go one octave above or one octave down, then there's no effect. What it means is basically you're tiring out a kind of octave bandpass filter. It's almost like you're processing things in octave subbands, and then if you can tire out one subband, and then one octave above, one octave down, there's no effect. It just implies that your visual processing is also doing this kind of like octave frequency doubling decomposition of vision, which is actually how wavelets work actually in computer image processing. So I want to share another screen. Okay, so this picture here basically just shows how frequency, as you normally understand it, if you double the frequency in terms of octaves, doubling and halving the frequency, you can basically draw a binary tree across each wave, or a complete wave period. And a name for it is a form of wavelet. So you can subdivide it. The main thing is basically when you double and halve in frequency, you can basically represent that doubling and halving frequency or frequencies using binary trees. And by shifting and sliding, like we saw with our dynamic language, you can represent phase, what's called phase. Okay, that's interesting little technical kind of detail. Now brainwaves, okay, in your brain, okay, now EEG, which is surface electrodes, okay, produce a very messy signal. It's all over the place. It's very, very messy. But when we look at underlying brainwaves through electrodes that are put into the brain during kind of operations, or putting electrodes into experimental animals, it's a very different picture. You have the very precise kind of like phase precise waves going on. So the gamma wave is very precise. It actually involves a kind of specific inhibitory receptor called the gamma aminobutyric acid A receptor, and it has a refractory period of 25 milliseconds, which is basically 1/40th of a second. So it works. It needs to recover in 25 milliseconds, and then it works again. So what it creates is a very kind of precise kind of gamma wave of first 40 hertz. And we find that beta waves is roughly 20 hertz, a doubling in frequency. And we find alpha waves is roughly 10 hertz, a doubling in frequency, and onto theta waves, 5 or 6 hertz. And neuroscientists have speculated that these waves should be recursively nested within one another, so that they nest one another hierarchically, recursively. So that, again, this doubling phenomena found in brain waves. Now, when we turn to language, okay, language is very important for cognition. Now, all language can be broken down in terms of binary trees. Now, okay, this expression, brains think, okay, 2 words, noun phrase, verb phrase, you can break it down into a binary tree, brains think. And you've got a more complex binary tree here called, fractal brains think binary. And you can recursively construct, even more complex binary trees. Way thinks fractal brains think binary. And you can go on and on. You can do this with all language. So all language can be broken down in terms of binary trees. Now, what was suspected for a long time, but was verified quite recently, about 10 years ago, is that the gamma wave, the 40 hertz component with respect to language, is used for phoneme processing. It's also the waves, the peaks and troughs are like buckets. They capture these phonemes, the atoms of speech. And basically, the gamma waves also like capture, the subcomponents of speech. And then the beta waves nest the gamma waves and do a top-down modulation. And then in turn, what was also suspected for a long time that theta waves are involved in syllable processing has also been recently confirmed. What it means is that all language, from words, sentences, and sentence constructs, right down to the atoms of speech, follow this binary tree structure, right down to the atoms, the phonemes of speech, right down to the gamma wave. Interestingly, when kind of people resonate with one another, when they're having an intimate conversation, or mothers and babies, basically, they find that the brain waves actually sync up. Okay. And you might be wondering why gamma waves and theta waves are so perfectly suited for syllable and phoneme processing. And the simple answer is basically that theta waves and gamma waves are also involved. Okay, they're also involved. Oh, screen sharing pause, so stop share. Okay, the answer is that basically the reason why theta waves and gamma waves are, break down speech so well is simply because the apparatus that produces speech, okay, moves my mouth around, basically also involves gamma waves and theta waves. And if you're paying attention, you're thinking this guy makes sense, your theta waves and gamma waves will synchronize with mine, and we can have a conversation, and you'll be listening. If you think this guy's talking rubbish, what the hell am I doing here? Then your waves will be out of sync, and that's actually been experimentally confirmed. So that's quite interesting. Now go to next exhibit, which is music. Okay, music, very important music, isn't it? There's something about music which is also doubling in pattern. Okay, so common time classical music, which is most popular kind of classical music, pop music, folk music, rock music, nursery rhymes, limericks have a certain beat pattern, a kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, a kind of powers of 2 grouping of the notes and beats. So this kind of music is very kind of, and limericks and nursery rhymes, there's a kind of grouping of the notes and beats in these kind of clusters of 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. So seeing the diagram, there's kind of like a kind of blocky nature to music, and pop music, kind of classical music, 4/4 classical music. The simple proposition is basically these popular forms of music are popular because they ease the process, because they reflect how the brain breaks down music, which is exactly the same way that the brain breaks down speech in this kind of binary hierarchy. Okay, so that's another kind of example of binary branching phenomena. Now, okay, we're going to move on. Basically, that is a kind of pretty wide spectrum of kind of phenomena of mind. So basically, language, obviously, that's very important for thought. Like speech, spatial mapping, kind of egocentric mapping, allocentric mapping, myself, in a certain place, then myself in a certain place looking in a certain direction. That's all spatial mapping. It all involves this kind of binary bifurcating doubling structure. Okay, that's a pretty good spread of cognitive science. In the next talk, okay, we're going to show that this binary phenomenon is also ubiquitous in actual neural architecture. Okay, in actual and neurons are binary trees, so it's actually absolutely ubiquitous in the kind of neuroscience level as well. What we're going to do now is explain that this binary kind of phenomena is also ubiquitous in biology, in basically what's called ontogenesis, and also in how genes work, how genes produce bodies. It's absolutely universal. Okay, so I'm going to screen share again. Okay, screen share. Careful not to stop recording. Screen share. Okay, look. Every cell in your body has basically come about through mitosis. So a fertilized egg has produced all the 15 trillion cells in your body through a doubling process. Okay, that's a binary tree representing fertilized egg, all the 15 trillion cells, and it's going on in your body right now. Cells are binary dividing. Okay, that's a binary process. Now, what's also very important is what's called a progenitor field formation. Now, basically, the cells, okay, then become clusters of cells, millions of cells, billions of cells. But those morphogen, those kind of progenitor fields, they need to kind of become the different parts of your body. So a fertilized egg keeps dividing, and all the cells are the same, but the cells need to differentiate into all the different parts of your body. And this process is also binary. So the great developmental biologist Brian Godwin has actually said that ontogenesis is like a bifurcation diagram. It's like a binary splitting diagram. And so here is a bifurcation diagram. It's like a schematic. So here we have, you see here, this is like the binary tree of mitosis, single cells spreading. But the diagram itself, it's a schematic of all the binary divisionings of the progenitor fields. And another prominent mathematical biologist, James D. Murray, has written a two-volume, two telephone directories of a book called Mathematical Biology. He says explicitly that it's very hard, even in a computer simulation, to get a trifurcation happening. That generally, what's happening in developmental biology with progenitor fields is bifurcation, binary divisioning. There's actually a very, okay, I'll go through this very quickly. There's actually a very precise mechanism for why this binary divisioning process happens, okay? So you see this diagram here, okay, basically the top here represents a progenitor field involving hundreds, millions of cells. And the progenitor field divides into two different progenitor fields with different, different characteristics, different gene patterns. So in order to explain this, I need to basically maybe wave my arms about. Okay, well, I'll do a bit of hand waving now. I've got to wave my hands about to explain it. Okay, look. Okay, that's the progenitor field. Okay, that's the progenitor field, and we need the progenitor field to divide into two progenitor fields. And that's the problem. Now, how you do it is this: you basically have the progenitor field, and at two poles you have what is called a morphogen producing agent that produces a chemical called a morphogen, and the morphogen diffuses across the progenitor field. Now, in every single cell in that progenitor field, you have a kind of like a genetic logic that detects the morphogens coming from the two poles. Okay, the crucial thing is basically one of these genes detect one of the poles and the other detects the other pole. Now, what these two genes do is they mutually inhibit one another. It just means that basically, if you're close to one axis, one pole, you're going to generally be more activated by that morphogen. And if you're closer to the other pole, you're generally going to be more activated by that morphogen. And basically, you're going to suppress the other gene. And along the center, you can have a kind of like center part, which basically is kind of like a one or the other. But the main thing, because you have mutual kind of inhibition, it's going to become one or the other. It's never, the coin always lands heads or tails. So what it means is basically that over time, one side will basically default to recognizing one side of the morphogen field, and then the other side will represent the other side. And then you can trigger a gene cascade to make one of the kind of, one side of this diagram differentiate, go left, and the other side go right, and they become different, morphogen fields with different transcription pattern transcription factor pattern expressions. So see, basically, there's a very reliable kind of mechanism for basically creating bifurcation in progenitor field formation. And we can go on. Basically, the famous experiments which won Nobel Prize to, this is how a genome represents space. So this diagram here represents a Drosophila embryo. Okay, so what is it's basically a fruit fly. Now, what it means is basically, what it shows basically is that a genome has to have a sense of space in the same way you need to have a sense of space to know where you are in a room and where you're pointing towards in a room, left, right, up, down, etc. So that's your personal sense of space. But a genome also has to have a sense of space because it needs to allocate arms and legs in the right place. You see, so a genome also has to understand, in a sense, space and time. Now, how the fruit fly does it is this. How the fruit fly does it is this. Over time, the embryo lays down these chemical markers. And over time, can you see my cursor? Over time, these chemical markers are laid down and are superposed on one another. And there's a doubling pattern. There's a doubling of these chemical markers. And then over time, basically, you have these chemical markers superimposed. What it means is basically, through the laying down of this doubling chemical pattern, when we look at side B of the diagram, it means you create a binary tree. And through these different chemicals, you create a binary combinatorial code that you can use to represent any point of the axis along the fruit fly embryo, which means then you can allocate arms, legs, wings, and antenna in the right place. The interesting thing is basically what we're saying is that how the genome is representing space is exactly how human beings represent space in this kind of binary subdividing manner. That's fascinating, isn't it? So there's actually another kind of symmetry. Basically, this kind of doubling pattern, subdividing space in this kind of binary tree way is how genomes and brains represent space. Now, our next exhibit, okay, this is how limbs form. This is basically a binary algorithm. This is called a kind of condensation. It's also like a progenitor field. So in A, 1, 2, and 3 are like basically recursive steps you can do. So if I have F, I can apply the step of a fork. I can fork it. And that's like a binary process, isn't it? I basically branched it into 2 different forks. And then I can apply this other step, 3. I can break off another point. Then I can recursively apply B to 3 again to make this, kind of condensation or progenitor field also branch. Now, if I recursively apply this algorithm, it's essentially like a recursive algorithm I can apply to these progenitor fields or condensations. I can basically create limbs. So this is from developmental biology. This is basically the classic one limb, one bone, 2 bone, many bones, fingers pattern of all tetrapods. So this is the top algorithm applied recursively to create arms and legs. So by applying that binary algorithm, we then have, basically, we can create a human arm and hand, a cat paw, a bat wing, and a whale flipper. So we can obviously scale it. A whale flipper is much bigger than a cat paw. We can also do what's called heterosynchrony and allometric scaling. We can basically rotate things, we can scale things, we can stretch things. And we can basically take that binary algorithm, we can create these shapes of different forms. Now the main, okay, back to stopping the screen share. The main point here is basically behind all these things I've shown you to do with thought, behavior, and ontogenesis, we have this recurring binary divisioning pattern, which means we can encode, we can use our binary language that merges with set theory and discrete mathematics, our mathematical language that can also stretch, slide, rotate, and shear to completely capture directly everything we've talked about to do with music, to do with language, to do with spatial mapping, to do with whale paws and whale flippers and bat wings and stuff. So it means that we have a language that rather directly captures all the phenomena we've discussed in this previous section, you see. So you see how powerful the language is. We can capture all the aspects of behavior, thought, and also ontogenesis, the formation of organisms, in the same basic language with the same basic invariant aspect or symmetry, this binary branching structure. Okay, now the last section of the talk, we're going to basically introduce what may be one of the biggest ideas of all time. Okay, this is I know, I mean, this is a huge idea. Okay, this idea is basically the systematic application of this idea of symmetry to life and intelligence. Okay, this is the big idea, which is going to lead to the creation of true artificial intelligence. So the big idea is this. Okay, so basically, I've got a screen share. Hang on, I've got a screen share. I've got a screen share. Oh God. Okay, the big idea is this. This is the big idea. The big idea is that there exists a perfect symmetry between life and intelligence. Now, in the early part of the talk, we said that there is a kind of symmetry. We believe that we can show a perfect symmetry between evolution and learning and creativity. Now, right back to the early part of the talk, do you remember a generative algorithm for artificial intelligence, an algorithm that can generate all the other algorithms that is based on evolution? So this is what we talked about earlier, and this is what we need to demonstrate. Okay, now what we've just done is we've shown underlying symmetry between developments, i.e. everything we've just gone through, bat wings and whale flippers and progenitor fields, ontogenesis, with the kind of binary bifurcating structures of thought and behavior. That's what we've just covered. Now this is what I need to explain, because at this point, people say, this idea is impossible, because how can a gene possibly be like a neuron? How can a gene regulatory network possibly be like a neuronal network? And how can a genome be like a brain? So really, this is what we need to explain, because this idea is essentially that life as we know it. What is life as we know it? It is evolution. It is ontogenesis. It is genomes and genes. That is life as we know it. And what is intelligence as we know it? It is neurons, neuronal networks, brains, thought, behavior, learning, and creativity. That is life and intelligence as we know it. And the idea that there's a perfect symmetry between life and intelligence, at first it seems totally impossible, because it seems totally implausible and impossible that a gene can be like a neuron. But the thing is, okay, basically new discoveries have been made about how neurons actually work and how gene regulatory mechanisms work in the past, literally the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, very new discoveries. Now, people think, even in recent textbooks, there's ideas of how neurons work, which are completely mistaken. Basically, any neural network book will have an idea of a neuron based on McCulloch-Pitts, based on an understanding of neurons from about 40, 50 years ago. But stuff has appeared literally in the past 10 years, which completely blows apart the old understanding of neurons. Okay, so at the very least, the next section of the talk is absolutely essential for people interested in neuronal networks to know about, in order to create the next generation of artificial neural networks. Because the current batch of neural networks, artificial intelligence neural networks, work nothing like real neurons. So now we're going to explain how neurons work in order to explain how neurons work exactly like genes. Okay, so next part, we're going to explain how neurons work. This kind of revised understanding of what neurons are and what neurons do. Okay, this is a really kind of like important next section of the talk. So this new understanding of neuron. Oh, I need a shared diagram again. Pardon my lack of experience with Zoom. I wish I discovered it earlier, but I didn't. So this is my third Zoom talk, so I need a screen sharing. Okay, look. This new understanding of neurons basically is basically has completely revolutionized the way we look at neurons. And this knowledge has not really filtered through because it's brand new. I mean, basically, it takes years to filter through to even to neuroscientists and to especially AI people. Now, firstly, neurons are generative and dynamic, which means basically neuronal networks in the brain are not static. They are constantly in motion. Now this is a kind of speeded up kind of like video of neurons kind of like forming like connections and branches. Okay, this is speeded up, and this is kind of like on a petri dish. So basically, there's lots of room for the axons and dendrites to move. Okay, so but the main thing to understand is basically this kind of motion, this kind of exploring dendrites, axons constantly growing. It continues. On one extreme, you have neurons that actually in an adult brain, new neurons form in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. So completely new neurons form, and these new neurons have to generate new axons and dendrites. But all the other neurons that you have from birth Okay, now the movement of the axons and the dendrites in all these other neurons is glacial because, there's a very tight space in the brain. It's full of neurons and neurophil and, cell bodies and stuff and blood vessels. Now the movement seems glacial, but in aggregate, there's a lot of movement going on because there's, trillions of dendrites and axons. Did you see? And even though the neurons themselves grow very slowly and branch out and, extend and contract very slowly, there are things called kind of axonal varicosities and dendritic varicosities, axonal spines. Now these move along the axons and dendrites at a much faster pace. The important thing is basically the neuronal network is configuring itself constantly. And basically what we show in the next talk especially is that this dynamic aspect of neurons is essential to how they work. Okay, so it's not a kind of like a inconvenient feature. It's actually essential to how we learn. Okay, so this is new understanding that has emerged quite recently. Screen share again. Okay, also about neurons. Okay, neurons also. Okay, just shift back to the last diagram again. Okay. Dendrites function as separate compartments across branches, also compartmentalization along their length. This is absolutely, fundamentally changes how we understand neurons. Okay, so in this diagram of the workhorse neuron of the brain, so basically this is the cortical pyramidal cell. Okay, this is basically the main workhorse neuron of the cerebral cortex. Okay, so the length here is about, a few millimeters. What they've found, okay, if you watch the cursor, what they've found is basically a neuron is divided into tiny separate compartments about 30 micrometers across. So we're talking about that kind of length. Okay, and there's literally tens of thousands of these tiny compartments all over the dendritic branches of a neuron. Now, these compartments actually function independent of one another. And these compartments do something quite remarkable. They do compositional learning. They basically composite signals from separate neurons. This completely blows apart the idea of what a neuron is and what it does. Because basically, a neuron is actually consisting of many of these separate compartments distributed all across. And also, neurons are compartmentalized across branches. And when there's a branching, there's also a kind of electrochemical compartmentalization of function across branches and between branches. Okay, so go back to this diagram here. But what has also recently been discovered is that these dendritic compartments do really complex processing. These dendritic compartments can do things like complex combinatorial logical operations like and, or, not, and XOR, and temporal order detection. So stop sharing for a bit. So basically, okay, that's the pyramidal neuron. Okay, you have a tiny compartment, okay, of about maybe dozens of synapses across maybe 30 to 50 micrometers. So one of those tiny compartments, okay. Now what it's doing, yes, it's receiving signals from other neurons, okay, and it's basically forming like the traditional model, the pre-synapse and the post-synapse. If the signal has arrived at an exact time, then there's a synaptic strengthening between the pre-synapse and the post-synapse. So one neuron gets strengthened, the projection is strengthened to another neuron. Now, what's been recently discovered is that these compartments also sideways do compositional learning between different neurons across a patch of dendrite. So what it's doing is conjugation, it's compositing different signals from different neurons along a tiny patch of dendrites. Now, interestingly, one of the things that the backpropagation people are saying is that backpropagation needs to do compositional learning. Okay, it'd be kind of like flaws. It doesn't do compositional learning. But this new understanding of neurons shows that basically how neurons fundamentally work is compositional. It's compositing different signals from different neurons along these tiny little patches. You see how, this little bit of information can really inform straight away existing AI. Now, these compartments do these logical operations. Now, XOR is basically like a logical operation that really caused the first generation of neural networks, perceptrons, to fail. That, in order for backpropagation to do XOR, you need several layers of neurons. Okay, but real neurons do XOR operation in a tiny patch of dendrite. Can you see the power of real neurons compared to neuronal networks, artificial neuronal networks? It was known 10 years ago that across a dendritic branch you can do XOR, but what was more recently discovered is basically that these compartments can also do exclusive OR, and obviously that is composition and conjunction and OR logic and not logic. And also recently discovered that a tiny patch of dendrite can also detect temporal order. Now, you need a recurrent loop in a traditional artificial neural network to detect time. But what recent discoveries have shown that a tiny patch of dendrite can also detect time. So what we're seeing is basically a view of neurons, which is basically orders of magnitude more powerful than existing neural networks. They can process time, XOR, and all these kind of logical operations. It's a model of neurons that see neurons more as kind of complex combinatorial logic circuits rather than simple, linear summation, kind of, sigmoid or, kind of rectified linear unit activation units, artificial neural networks. So you see, there's a kind of like a gap between artificial neural networks and real neurons. That kind of like, if you can fill that gap, I believe this is a key step to creating true artificial intelligence. I mean, really, existing neural networks have completely missed the point, really. Okay, going to screen share the next kind of point about neurons. Okay. So there's more. I mean, the traditional neurons, basically, there's a spiking zone in the cell body, but that's not the case. In real neurons, there's multiple spiking zones in the cell body corresponding to the major dendritic branches. And then all across the neuron, all across all these branches, there's actually dendritic spiking. There's not one spiking zone in the cell body. There's actually thousands of spiking zones, and they do these complex logical operations. And it's basically a way of understanding neurons based on real neuroscience that is really the answer to exactly what the kind of neural network people are saying. No, our neural networks can't do all these kind of things, but it's exactly what real neurons can do anyway. So okay, so that's how real neurons work. Okay. Now to genes. Okay, so how do genes work? Okay, so how do genes work? Let's stop the share. Okay, look, a gene is like a strand of DNA, isn't it? The DNA is like strands. So genes are on these DNA strands. So how is a rope like a tree? Okay, so a neuron's like a tree we saw earlier, but DNA is like a rope. So how can you possibly explain a neuron to be like a gene? Most of my battery is running low on my camera. I'm just going to plug in this. My camera doesn't run out. I thought it's going to last a bit longer. Let me just quickly plug in this cable. It's because I left the camera on. That's why. Okay, so basically, I hope this doesn't switch off the camera. Okay, Dan, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, back.
Okay. So, okay, I got a certain amount of battery left because I left it on for an hour before the talk. Okay. At some point, the vision and sound will switch to my laptop, or maybe not. Maybe the battery will last until the end of the talk. Okay, so basically, we're gonna just continue on, and hopefully, we're gonna just do the rest of the talk with this camera. The nice camera and sound. Okay, so a gene is basically like a rope. So how is that like a neuron? We'll explain. So basically, screen share again. Screen share this next diagram. So I need a screen share. Okay, so screen share. Oh, screen share. Okay, so this is how a neuron is like a gene. Okay, so what we have basically. You see in the diagram A, you see basically what we have is a stretch of DNA. And what we have is basically what's called cis regulatory modules. Okay, so this is like a cis regulatory modules. And what it does, it takes inputs. It takes a combinatorial input from what's called transcription factors. So this one is taking 3 transcription factors, TF1, TF2, TF3, and that's a cis regulatory module. Now, what it does things in a compositional kind of like a combinatorial way. So if the free transcription factors binds onto the cis-regulatory module and it activates. It kind of like switches on. Okay, so in diagram B, we see the actual gene, the actual coding part of the gene in diagram B. Okay, and what we have here is what's called RNA polymerase. When the RNA polymerase activates, then it rolls down a gene and it basically expresses the gene. It produces a messenger RNA. Now, what we have here is basically, you see the gene, the string is called a loopome. See, it loops around the RNA polymerase. So there's a very precise looping structure whereby the cis-regulatory modules almost like touch the RNA polymerase and the kind of like expression region. Now this has 4 loops. Some genes have 15 loops. So basically, also 15 cis-regulatory modules. Now, to keep things simple, we'll talk about one gene, one protein, or metabolic enzyme, or transcription factor. Okay, there's multiple splicing. To keep things simple, we just explain one gene, one kind of protein, one output. Okay, so it means that basically, okay, this cis-regulatory module, or that cis-regulatory module, or that one can activate the RNA polymerase and activate the gene. So it means basically, if I do CRM, CR2, CR3 into diagram 3, you see this is more like a neuron, isn't it? So cis-regulatory module 1 or cis-regulatory module 2 or 3 can activate the gene, which is just like a neuron, because neurons with their multiple firing zones, it's become the case now that each dendrite can actually activate the neuron. So it means it's basically disjunction, new understanding of neurons, that each dendrite is the activation zone. So in here, each cis-regulatory module is the activation zone. It means that basically what we showed earlier with those processing kind of patches on dendrites of neurons, they correspond to these cis-regulatory modules. And basically, in the same way that other neurons project to these patches on dendrites, transcription factors, which are the signals from other genes, activate the transcription factors. It means basically, okay, just stop the screen share. Yeah, I haven't got my lights. I mean, I'm in Switzerland. I've got my lights, so it's getting dark, and so I hope you can still see me, can't you?
Yeah, you're fine. See,
yeah, we can see you. Okay.
Open the lights. I had lights are back in London, so I have to turn the switches on the main lights of the room. Okay, look. Basically, some genes produce transcription factors. So in a sense, that's their signal. That's their firing signal. So when they produce a transcription factor, they're firing like a neuron. And the same way neurons fire probabilistically, genes will activate probabilistically. Now, okay, the axon part, if the cis-regulatory modules are like dendrites feeding into the gene to activate the gene, then the axon part is basically the transmission of the transcription factor that binds onto another cis-regulatory module. You see, it's not like a physical network like neurons are physically dendrites and physically axons, physical like tree structures. What we have is a transmission medium. We have basically transcription factors being manufactured, chemicals broadcast into these receptor sites. But it works the same in the same way that a landline with a physical wire, basically, talking to another landline telephone versus a mobile phone, you basically get the message. So basically, you have point-to-point transmission between a transcription manufacturing zone to the transcription factor binding site, which is exactly as an axon binding specifically to certain, points on other dendrites of other neurons. So I mean, it means that basically this idea of transcription factors is like the kind of connections between axons and dendrites in neuronal networks. Once you see how these, okay, so back to my diagrams. Once you see how genes are like neurons, so there are other kind of parallels. I mean, you have axon point-to-point communication. You have also inhibitory connections and excitatory connections. These are adjustable. And in the same way we showed earlier that the neurons do disjunctive, all these kind of like combinatorial and combinatorial logical processing, so do genes. And also what neurons do is kind of summation. What has also been discovered is that these cis-regulatory modules also act in a summatory way. They sum the signals of the transcription factors. It means that there is this real kind of like interesting correspondence between kind of genes and neurons. Okay, from there, okay, if you once you see that basically this basic idea of how genes can work like neurons, then you can see how gene regulatory networks can link up like neuronal networks, and how the genome can be like a brain. Okay, this is we don't have time to go through all the details of a genome and all the details of a brain. Obviously, that'll take some time, but you can see in essence that brains are made of neurons, and the genome is made of genes with communicating transcription factors. Now, the analogy is not superficial. Once you see genes as neurons, basically in the same way neurons are arranged hierarchically in the brain, also genes are arranged in a hierarchical way. So the bottom of the hierarchy is genes that produce metabolic enzymes and structural proteins. That's the output of the genome. But above that is basically a kind of hierarchy of gene batteries, groupings of these gene clusters, in the same way, representational clusters in the brain. So basically, once you see a gene as a neuron, you can see how gene regulatory networks can combine as neuronal networks, and how a genome can be as a brain. Okay, so back to our diagram. Okay, almost at the end of the talk. I've still got a bit of battery left. Almost to the end of the talk. Okay, so back to our diagram. Okay, so basically, in a short space of time, by getting a glimpse even of how a gene is like a neuron, and this bottom part of the diagram, gene regulatory network as neuronal network, genome as brain. Now, we've already done this bit, development, ontogenesis as thought behavior, through binary trees, through this invariant aspect of binary trees. But now evolution, okay, evolution, learning, creativity. A good way of explaining this is to use a book that came out a few years ago called, it's written by David Eagleman and Anthony Brandt, okay, The Runaway Brain. And basically what they're saying is that kind of evolution and learning creativity, they're saying that basically, okay, stop share. What they're saying is that human creativity involves three basic operations. That they say it's break, bend, and blend. Okay, it's not a new idea. They're basically rehashing old ideas. So through break, bend, and blend, all human creativity comes out of that. Now these operations also we can use in the kind of like operations of evolution, because the basic operations of evolution can also represent, also use breaking. We break genes apart and recombine them. We can, kind of like splice kind of different genes and splice them together and mix them and match them. So that break part of human creativity is also in genomes. We also blend when we have like like kids are a blend of mother and father. So that creates variation. So basically, multiple kind of like a gene mixing, crossing over, that's blending. Okay. So the blending of human creativity is also found in genomics. In terms of bending, we saw earlier with whale flippers, bat wings, and cat paws, basically, and Darwin's famous kind of finch beaks. We take the elements of evolution, we can bend them and blend them, and kind of stretch them and slide them and rotate them, etc. Now, then in turn, all the kind of transformations of genomics, i.e., point deletion, gene insertion, deletion, we can also apply to human creativity. So you kind of create a song, you play a tune, you play a note differently. Oh, it sounds better. Or I write a poem, I change that word. Oh, it's a better poem. So that's point insertion, point deletion. Human creativity, we can change bits of our creative constructs. And also blending, we take kind of like mixing genes together, and basically in the same way human beings mix ideas together for human creativity. There's a fundamental kind of operation in evolution called what's called retrotransposition, and basically it's when you it's like copy and paste. You copy and paste bits of genes to different parts of other genes and different parts of other parts of the genome. It's been estimated that 50% of the human genome is retrotransposed, copy and paste elements, and that scientists believe that most primate evolution has been through retrotransposition. But copy and paste is also something that humans do in human creativity. We copy and paste other people's ideas, and we mutate them, and gene insert, delete, and make minor alterations. And there's another kind of like a thing called whole genome duplication, whereby we take the entire genome, duplicate it, and then make changes on this other duplicate part of the genome. there's this idea that great artists steal, less artists borrow. So, this idea that human creativity, yes, involves taking previous ideas, breaking, blending, splicing, copy and pasting. It means basically that all the transformations of human creativity are also found in evolution, and vice versa. All the transformations of evolution and genomes can also be applied to human creativity. And then when we combine that with the idea that what evolution and human creativity is doing is working on the same substrate, the same language, the same binary tree structures of ontogenesis and thought and behavior, the same underlying symmetry. And in turn, when we understand that the basis of where it's happening, genomes and brains, that there's an equivalence between genomes and brains, gene regulatory networks and neuronal networks, and genes and neurons, it then places the idea of evolution happening in the human brain on a far more kind of a stable basis, I think. I think it basically puts evolution as learning and creativity, evolution happening in human intelligence and in biological intelligence. It basically puts it in the wider context. It makes the kind of compelling idea we talked about earlier into something far more convincing, because it puts it in a kind of far broader kind of theoretical scheme. So anyway, to wrap up today's talk, I still got a bit of battery left. Okay, you're going to stop the share. I can probably finish the talk before it gets completely dark here, and I've run out of battery. Look, basically, we will build on the next talk. We build on this talk to basically then go on to show how the what's called the master algorithm. We take all the ideas of this talk, and then we use these ideas to then basically unify the existing AI machine learning technologies. Now, there's something we haven't quite done yet. We haven't actually explained the underlying process behind the brain and ontogenesis. That's what we need to do. There's a single unifying process behind the brain and ontogenesis, which we'll explain in the next talk. And what we'll also show in the next talk is basically the idea that there's a unique part of the human brain called the polar frontal cortex. And it's involved with this thing called recursive self-modification and recursive processing, basically. So there's something about human intelligence which is way above kind of chimpanzee, bonobo chimpanzee intelligence. And we're going to explain that it has to do with this polar frontal cortex. So we're going to extend the ideas of this talk, and we're going to basically take it much further and basically, show how it all unifies then into a kind of unified theory, not just of life and intelligence, we've kind of like laid the foundations of in today's talk, but also a unified theory of life, intelligence, and all artificial intelligence, and a lot of computer science besides. Okay, so I reckon we'll stop it there. That's been coming up to 2 hours. I'll just take off my lapel mic, and I'll switch on the lights because it's getting dark here. Okay, just turn on the lights. Okay, put my lapel mic back on. And I guess we'll take questions and answers. I guess that's kind of like the end of the first part, and we'll basically continue on in maybe next week or a week and a half later. So I guess, okay, so thanks for coming, and we'll stick around for questions and answers now. And so I see some hands in the air. Does that mean you want to ask a question? So Stephen, you asked to unmute.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. Your presentation is quite full. I kept waiting for you to introduce the work of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's perspective and work pertaining to the function of neural microtubules and a quantum connectiveness to the precursive download of consciousness itself within the ontogenic function of the evolutionary of primary intelligence to your own work and modeling. I've listened to your work before, but I've yet to hear you say anything about the microtubules and the quantum connectiveness.
It's funny. Someone sponsored me to go to the Towards the Science of Consciousness conference, 2014. It was their 20th anniversary, and funny, I arrived early, and the organizer thought I was part of Korean TV, and well, to cut a long story short, I had dinner with Hameroff and Penrose before the conference began. So it was a really long conversation about I got into an argument with this other guy, quite famous scientist actually now, and he said, "Oh, wait, you know, brain isn't fractal," and I managed to explain that there's no actually working definition of what is fractal, and there's by the definitions given in textbooks, then my theory is fractal. And he kind of lost the argument. And he kind of lost the argument in front of Roger Penrose, his hero. He never forgave me for that. Unfriended me on Facebook. And anyway, funny. Well, basically, the fractal theory of the brain is basically that what Penrose and Hameroff is saying is basically that microtubules are basically performing a mapping function with the surface of neurons to affect the functioning of neurons. And they're saying that basically there's a collapse of the wave function to do with the microtubules, by which, you know, some cosmic kind of quantum effect can then influence, you know, neural processing. I personally think that what happened was that Roger Penrose wrote a book called Emperor's New Mind, which I read actually the year it came out when I was 20 years old. And I think he made an idea which is very fascinating. And I think there is something quantum going on with consciousness. I think there is, you know, quantum effects, which are very important for the evolution of the universe. You know, in the last talk, we talked about destiny wave functions, you know, kind of taking the universe to a set conclusion. But that destiny wave function can also take thoughts to a set conclusion, i.e., you know, instill kind of set thoughts to arrive at a certain conclusion from this kind of future intelligence, if you will. So I think where they go wrong is that I don't believe necessarily microtubules are necessary for this quantum effect to happen. And I think the quantum effect happens overall over the entire universe. Now, whether microtubules are doing these computations, it would be very fascinating. But at the same time, the fractal brain theory, in terms of decomposing things into binary trees and binary combinatorial codes, can also accommodate the effect and action of these microtubules. Does that make sense? So basically, you know, what Hameroff is saying, it still has to be shown whether these microtubules are influencing the membrane potential. That still has to be shown. Whether it's influencing in a way that is conducive to better or you know, kind of like significant effects on information processing. But the theory I've formulated in terms of mappings of binary trees and binary combinatorial codes can accommodate the actions of microtubules, but at a lower kind of fractal level. So that's work pending, but that's kind of work pending. But I think where the time has gone is to do with genomes. But I think in the future, the theory may well encompass microtubules if more data and evidence comes to support their role in influencing the membrane potential, which is necessary for influencing the actions of neurons. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
Yes, to a certain extent, because it connects it to delta brain waves, because the delta brain waves are non-conscious. You're referring to gamma and betas, but it seems to me, in terms of, let's say, the default mode network of the human mind itself has a defensive mode that is disinclined to open up. But when the delta brainwave, then there becomes the download of what you were referring to, of this wider consciousness, which is part of this phylogenetic, ontogenetic development of evolution itself. Some people can be more receptive if their defense mechanisms or their default network is released. And this happens during the delta wave sleep. So then the individual is aroused with symbols, imageries, dreams, and inspiration. And then this group consciousness develops where then multiple people are contributing toward the same goal. So this is why I look at your work and the work of Penrose and Hameroff as coalescing into a wider understanding of this process itself.
No, Stephen, totally. I got the impression that Penrose, Hameroff, and I are on the same side. We think there's something more than materialism and reduction of consciousness into, you know, simple atoms and stuff. So I think they see the bigger picture, basically. I think he said basically his motivation for writing Emperor's New Mind is he wanted to basically show there's something more than existing physics is kind of letting on.
Well, very good, because you have a very holistic perspective that these fellows don't have, because they've been structured into the system of academia. And you have the boundaries open up, and you're able.
Stephen,
No,
totally.
I appreciate your work, and I'm going to be looking forward to your second presentation. So
fantastic, yeah. No, totally. I can do, because I'm basically self-funded. Well, I need help from people and stuff, and benefactors. And but I've spent 30 years basically pursuing my own path. You know, basically, it's been a funny, tough path. I mean, but I'm essentially self-funded basically, so I can think what I want. But in a conversation with Hammeroff, I kind of like, you know, I kind of suggested, Hammeroff, you know, did you, he's obviously saying, he was saying he had kind of like experiences on psychedelics. He didn't quite say it.
Correct.
And he kind of said,
Correct.
And I took him towards that direction. And he also like said, you know, wait, I can't talk about this.
Yes, Eric, that's right.
It's almost as if, yes, they have these thoughts, but they can't say it because they're in the mainstream. They don't want to lose their careers. They don't want to get sacked. Yeah. No, completely, yeah. No, I totally see the freedom of basically working outside of academia, completely, yeah. So there's no way I could have come up with what I've come up with working in academia. I mean, my original path was PhD, you know, in artificial intelligence, neuroscience. But I realized I would have thrown my life away completely, yeah, completely.
Yes, yeah.
Any other questions? Adrian, do you want to ask a question? Do you want to ask to unmute?
Yes, okay. Can you hear me? Hello?
Adrian, yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you, yes.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask you or the audience if they know about memory stores. I have a background on electronics and maybe using binary memories and in contrast using memory stores for I don't know, like getting these characteristics of memory in computers.
You mean memory as in DRAMs and SSDs and stuff?
Yes, but with the new component called memory store.
Oh yes. I got a friend who works in memristas. He's in Sandia Labs. That's a very hot field of research. I got to say. I mean, it's just very hot. Personally, I mean, for me, just working in Java, C++ code is far more flexible. I can work faster that way. And I think there is this idea of using neuromorphic computing, using memristas and directly using these components to model, you know, brain processes. But for me personally, I mean, I think writing computer code first to make prototypes work and then transferring to memristas is my kind of personal path. I can also say that years ago, I met a guy called, the university I went to, called Igor Alexander. He was a big name in the 80s and 90s. And what he did something interesting. He actually used DRAM chips directly as if they were neurons. So basically used the decoding part as if inputs to the DRAM chip. And he basically used it to encode combinatorial recognizing codes in individual DRAM chips. And he did something called Wizard in the 80s. So that's a rather direct application of memory technology to model the brain. But I think there's lots of potential in memristas in the future, definitely, yeah. But if you know, I mean, you could message other people in this kind of thread and talk, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so any other questions? Any other?
Oh, this is Matt. I've got another question.
Yeah, Matt, go for it.
Is there any way you can explain to non-programmers how a programmer could integrate all this information about intelligence and the brain into programming AI?
So the question is, how do you explain to a non-programmer, how do you integrate all this information into code?
Yes.
With a lot of hard work and difficulty. Okay, what is? I mean, programming. There's the actual abstract algorithm, which is basically where most of the work has gone in the past 5-6 years. So that's really, it's almost as if my head is working in terms of discrete mathematics and formal axiomatic systems and trying to discover this recursively self-modifying algorithm. Okay, that's one level, which basically to a non-programmer, that is essentially like working with, you know, like constructs of discrete mathematics. Does that make sense?
No, yes. I just think that there's a bit of a disconnect between, when talking about AI, between all this information you're presenting about the brain and then, you know, people who don't program, you know, it's like, well, what does this have to do with like creating, artificial intelligence.
Oh yes, yes. That's the interface. Basically, you need to express these ideas into a formal language, which is this language of this kind of like binary tree language I was talking about earlier, and how this binary tree language can represent space and time. In terms of creating computer programs, how it translates into AI, that's the hard work. You just need to learn a load of APIs and programming technologies in order to translate these abstract ideas into stuff, even things like getting data from a camera, your smartphone camera, even capturing sound, even doing things like nice computer graphics and pre-processing, and things like multi-threading programming and stuff. There's a huge wave of complexity which you have to learn to translate it into products. So that's where a lot of the work has been going. But in terms of lay people understanding the core theory, and basically, I guess it is the idea that you translate these data structures, binary trees. But basically, the easiest way to understand it is basically you have binary trees. They can represent space and time. And instead of like a language indirectly representing things, these binary trees map directly to these constructs of thought, behavior, and language, and ontogenesis. And then basically these binary trees is the language itself. And then in order to create AI, what you're doing is you're encoding these binary tree data structures into the computer, and you're using code algorithms to animate those binary trees. Does that make sense? Does that explain better?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, well, I just want to get some clarification on two things that you mentioned.
Yeah. Who is that?
And Jazz again.
Oh, Jazz again. Hello, hey, Jazz.
And just one thing about Stephen as well, what you mentioned about Penrose back in '94 when they did the first conference on consciousness. The Times did a big article, and 2/3 of it, the page was devoted to the conference in covering Penrose, and 1/3 of it was devoted to what I was actually doing, which is to do with microtubules. I just finished my master's degree in computer modeling of molecular and biological processes, but part of the research I did was looking into drugs that work on the brain, anti-epileptics, anticonvulsants, and a lot of that underlying biochemistry looks at the activity of microtubules, but more importantly, how they are embedded or immersed in the quantum field through water molecules. Okay. And what you've said, I think, is really important about the whole bifurcation thing. It does extend right down into the neurons. Within the neurons, there's a kind of nervous system each neuron has, which is made up of microtubules. And within the microtubules, there's volumes of water, which is active or structured water, which can cause electrical currents to run along the microtubules. In the same way, there's a geometry down there, and the quantum activity influences the water, and that influences the electricity that runs along the microtubules and ultimately in the neurons. So I just wanted to mention that there is a link, definitely, and a link directly to what you've said. It scales down to that level. But the things I wanted to get clarity on, where you mentioned the neuron and the dendrites and everything seems to be a physical, spatial, fractal representation of a logic gate or an algorithm, you normally get from truth tables and things like that, which is great to know. But then you mentioned about genetics, but you don't have a physical network as such. What you have is, as you said, the distribution of chemicals over time. So that's more like a temporal network as opposed to a physical, spatial network. And if you put the two of them together, then you get what you're talking about. Is that right? The genetic thing is more like a temporal network? Something that is networked over time?
No, I mean, on one level, when we talked about progenitor field formation and morphogen gradients, that really is like a diffusion of signals, like a gradient of morphogen chemicals. But when I talk about transcription factors, that really is like point-to-point connection, because the human brain, the human genome has about 2,600 transcription factors. It's like letters of the alphabet. So each transcription factor, when it's produced by a gene, will bind specifically to specific transcription factor binding sites. There might be tens of thousands of these located around the genome.
But that's a pathway. It's not an actual physical channel like you get in a neural network.
That's what I was saying about basically a mobile phone using transmission medium and a landline using a physical wire.
Yeah, it's like a virtual network.
Yeah, exactly. You get the message. That's the main thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I just want to get clarified. It's a virtual network. It does exist, but it exists over time. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yes, that's right.
Right, great.
It's basically the equivalence of neurons and genes. There's more to explain to really kind of ram home the point. Really, I just did a quick superficial kind of just to get a gist of the idea that you can actually look at neurons like genes. Okay.
No, I get it. I appreciate it. It's a view I've always had back since the 90s, and the whole idea of fractal concepts involved intelligence, and what you've been talking about is something we've obviously had in common for quite a few years, but I'm always learning things from you, getting a slightly different angle or perspective. There's an affine transformation of my own intelligence going on listening to you.
yeah, fantastic, man, fantastic. I mean, it is like a, I mean, the beauty of the affine transformations built into the binary tree language is, the kind of like binary tree formation of a tetrapod, one bone, two bone, many bones hands, to whale flipper to bat wing. That is totally affine transformation. That's totally.
Yeah, I'm getting bifurcations in my thoughts and perspectives as a result of listening to you.
Oh, fantastic, man! No, that's fantastic. Great. Any other questions? Any other questions? That's a marathon session. Really great. Any other questions?
Oh, this is Matt. I have one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
Is there any way you can quickly like give us like a summarized definition of intelligence? Like you talked about how intelligence, some people thought it was like a point in design space, but it's actually like exploring design mind space.
Oh yeah, Matt, I'm gonna there is an answer. Basically, in this talk, I've shown us symmetry across life and intelligence, but I've not actually explained what it is. Okay, in this talk. Now, should I tell you what I think the answer is? It's shocking. It's completely shocking. I can give you a summary of the next talk. What the answer is. It is completely shocking. It is completely. Okay, this is what it is. Okay, this is what it is. Everything in that table we saw earlier to do with life and intelligence, okay, basically everything in that table can be expressed as binary trees. So we had like, linked lists expressing time, but that could equally represent DNA. And also binary trees representing neurons. Neurons are binary trees. Everything in the table can be decoded or represented with the binary tree language, which then can be encoded in our formal axiomatic system, discrete mathematics language, okay? Do you get it? Everything at the table. No, we still haven't explained what is life and what is intelligence. We've shown that there's a symmetry across the two. If you explain one, you explain the other. But what is it? Okay, the answer is this in a nutshell. The answer is shocking. The answer is absolutely shocking. Once you've reduced all life and intelligence to binary trees, it means you can represent all life and intelligence using discrete mathematics and formal axiomatic systems. Now, there is a generative process which is recursively self-modifying. And from a recursively self-modifying atom, you can generate all binary trees and all formal axiomatic systems, all the constructs of life and intelligence. Does that make sense so far?
So are you saying that intelligence is just like part of this one system?
Okay, the answer is this. This is what I think life and intelligence is. It's completely shocking. It has to do with the idea that basically there's a fundamental relationship between mathematics and the universe. So mathematics, explored for its own intrinsic beauty and kind of elegance, finds perfect expression in the physical universe. So Einstein's general relativity was essentially non-Euclidean geometry explored outside of physics, and then it applied perfectly to understanding space and time. Okay, so there's a real deep relationship between mathematics and the universe. Now, if set theory, discrete mathematics, and formal axiomatic systems is the deepest level of mathematics, if there's a clever, recursively self-modifying trick happening at the deepest level of mathematics that generates all space of binary trees and binary tree constructs that correspond to life and intelligence, then surely that mathematically elegant, recursively self-modifying process, like a recursive loop happening at the deepest level of mathematics, must have correspondence to the physical universe. It's the deepest level of mathematics. Then what is that correspondence? It is life and intelligence. And that's how deep and that's how fundamental life is. And that's how fundamental intelligence is. And this goes to this idea of a perfect universal language. This is, from antiquity, pre-Renaissance, that this perfect universal language gives rise to life, intelligence, and a universe. It's almost mystical. It is to do with the monad, that there's a monad that basically all these kind of great thinkers, John Dee, Riemann Lowell, speculated. And from this monad, you construct life, intelligence, and a universe. So I think the monad is essentially the most minimal formal axiomatic system you can possibly have, i.e. the deepest level of mathematics. with this recursively self-modifying loop that can generate all the other formal axiomatic systems, and all mathematics reduces to formal axiomatic systems. So you can generate all mathematics, all algorithms, all life and all intelligence. And I think that is the answer, I think, to what is the nature of life and intelligence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it'd be really nice if you could just, if someone asked like, what exactly is intelligence? Is there any like definition you can give without going on like a tangent?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the kind of cosmic deep answer. But I mean, on the, you know, in terms of intelligence as we understand it, then it is basically this recursively self-modifying mechanism, which I explained. You know what I said about the polar frontal cortex is a unique part of the human brain. And what I explained, it does this thing called recursive self-modification. Now, if you think about it, there's this old idea that, okay, evolution evolves evolvability. Okay, so this is an old idea that evolution is not a static function. It actually changes itself. Evolution evolves evolvability. It is a recursively self-modifying function. And if you believe that evolution is fundamentally happening in the brain, then recursive self-modification must be happening in the brain. Now, in artificial intelligence, people believe that this is the holy grail of artificial intelligence. People talk about recursive self-modification, but no one knows how to do it. And I think recursive self-modification is fundamental to human intelligence and real intelligence, without going into formal axiomatic systems and this recursive self-modifying thing happening at the deepest level of mathematics on a higher level in terms of evolution, in terms of the workings of the mind, polar frontal cortex, then this recursive self-modifying process is also happening at this level. And, you know, the technological singularity, this idea of apocalypse for nerds, rapture for geeks, it is recursive self-modification, but happening on a global scale of the entire, you know, kind of scientific, industrial, human race, societal, political complex. Did you get it?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Oh God! Any other questions? I think we'll leave it there. I think Tyler, you have a question? Okay, you have a question?
Yeah. I'd just like to point out that this Zoom call itself seems to be an extension of this. If you think about the idea of, first of all, there's a grid of all of us, like the flat map kind of binary tree thing.
Yeah.
And we're all listening to each other and getting feedback from each other. So there's like a recursive self-modification going on.
Okay.
And it's like, and that, as someone mentioned before about the problem of moving the data, it's better to leave the data in place.
Yes, right.
Calculation there.
Right,
so
yes,
if you think about that, you know, we're all in place in the one spot, and so it's like lining up. It's like we're connecting all of our brains into this now higher order fractal intelligence that we're participating in at this moment. Seems to be a natural occurrence of everything we've been speaking of.
Well, Tyler, completely. I think what I said earlier about the entire human race becoming like the hypothalamus for the super intelligence. You know, basically the digital revolution has just begun in terms of like, you know, like what's about to come in terms of digital information processing technologies. We're literally the dirt tracks versus motorways. We're literally at the very beginning. So I see human beings scattered across the planet, scattered across the solar system or galaxy, linked up with things like Zoom calls and this kind of, you know, these kind of communication technologies as becoming like one great big distributed hypothalamus, like, you know, the central control system for this, you know what I'm saying, the artificial intelligences that are about to come. And in relative terms, the hypothalamus is 1% of the human brain. And you have this vast, you know, kind of computing structure that is around that hypothalamus. But the entire human race will become like the hypothalamus of this even bigger superstructure of super intelligence. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So it also seems like human intelligence is completely integral to this intelligence.
Completely. I completely don't see the sense in people saying, oh, artificial intelligence is going to replace us. It's completely dumb. I mean, you know, I have kids and I see basically the idea that they will have kids, and then basically life will go on right to the end of time. You know what I'm saying? This idea that basically somehow we create Hans Moravec, that we create these mind children and that they replace us. I don't see that at all. I see basically a continuity between the very beginnings of evolution, biological life. Do you know what I'm saying? with where we are now, that this hypothalamus, this recursive loop of self-preservation has continued right from the beginning of time, and will continue right to the end of time, and that, you know, our hypothalamus as human beings and human race will become integrated with this future evolution of this super intelligence in one kind of holistic whole. I think that's the better way of looking at things, I think. Okay, any other?
Thank you.
God, thank you all. I mean, any other questions? I mean, gosh, that's the marathon session. So that's a bit of a, well, anyway, the battery did not run out. The the indicator on the camera, it gives a kind of funny reading. It gives a kind of like tiny, that is amazing. Okay, great. I guess we'll wrap it up. I mean, you know, keep in contact with me, you know, keep in touch, and basically follow me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, support me on Patreon, donate to me on PayPal, but loads more to come. So there's another talk coming in about a week's time, the second part. So do come back and listen to that, because basically this is the kind of preparation, the ground hills for the rest of the mountain. Okay, so battery's gone. Okay, battery's gone. Battery is going. Battery is low level.
Thank you, Wade. That was absolutely brilliant. Wow, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Wei.
See you guys later. Take care.
Great
Yeah,
talk.
a lot.
Okay,
That was amazing.
Good night, Ty. Thanks for everything.
Thanks, Wade, so much. Oh my God.
Very fascinating.
Marathon session. I really enjoyed. Come back next week. Come back when I do the next part, because this is
brilliant. Brilliant.
You heard nothing yet, really.
Yeah. See you, Wade. Thanks, buddy. Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for you know, listening. Hey. Okay. I gotta do family baby stuff. So Tyler, thanks for tuning in again.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. I look forward to the next talk.
Well, man, probably in a week's time, or a week and a half at the most, and soon, yeah. And Matt, thanks a lot. Thanks for your questions. Very, very stimulating. Very interesting. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm gonna do baby family stuff now, because that's really. So we're gonna come back in about a week's time to do the second part. So absolutely come back. Okay. So I'm gonna. That's amazing, perfect timing. Literally, the battery ran out at exactly the right time. Exactly, you know, amazing. Okay, stop record.